It's an autumn night as I'm typing this out. The heat of summer has been replaced by a comforting breeze that at times turns into an almost winter chill. The leaves turn bright green to various shades of yellow, orange, and brown. A line of forest outside of the town has been decorated with this autumn shade and looks like a painting. The sky is pitch black with no moon showing. It's nights like this I'm reminded of my grandfather. So I'm writing this out as a sort of dedication to him. My hometown is a pretty large cemetery, about 1,500 graves. Some of them go back to the pre-Civil War. Everyone in my family has been buried there, including my grandfather. I suspect I'll be buried there one day as well. In the middle of the cemetery stands a large, old angel statue. Its height is about 6 foot, standing on a platform and overviewing the whole cemetery. Its color may have been a marble white at some point, but is faded to a dirty gray. Supposedly, it was erected when the cemetery was first built. There's a local legend about the statue that says if you approach it, it will give you a sign that someone you know will die at midnight. The statue will inform you by crying tears from its stone eyes. It's because of this phenomenon that the town refers to the statue as the Weeping Angel. There have been attempts to clean and refurbish the statue, all of which proved unsuccessful. Whenever it gets cleaned up and polished, its shade of dirty gray returns. The city has also made attempts to remove the statue, but any equipment fails whenever it approaches the statue. One truck that pulled the statue died immediately. Another had all of its tires blown at once. Eventually, everyone decided to just leave the statue alone. Not a lot of people go near it. That is, except for the teenagers looking for a bit of midnight fun. Some of us would sneak out to the cemetery late at night to test the legend. We would approach the weeping angel at midnight to see if it cries. That's what me and my friends did one night some years ago. I snuck out of my parents' house at 11:15 p.m. We left early to make sure everyone would be there on time. When we got there, we decided to test out the stories by walking up to the statue one at a time to see if it gives a reaction. We had some time before midnight finally rolled around, so we decided to hang out for a bit. The effects of pot started taking over, and the cemetery started having a more eerie atmosphere than it would have at a late hour like that night. A cemetery after dark, headstones all around, and a large, creepy angel statue made us feel really freaked out. The most disturbing element of that place was just how quiet it was. The statue towered over us, looking over the whole graveyard like a silent guardian. Her wings were folded into her back neatly. Her gray stone hands had folded into each other over her chest. It might have been the chronic, but to us, the statue seemed alive. When we were 5 minutes to midnight, we started the game. We crowded around the statue and allowed each other to walk up to it one at a time. It gave no reaction to 4 members of the group. Then, it was my turn. At first, the angel statue gave no reaction and was still as ever. It was damp from the recent rainfall and fog surrounding it. I stood still for several seconds and waited for something to happen. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it at her face, looking for a sign of tears. A pair of hands pushed down my shoulders and a yell erupted from behind me. I felt myself jumping a couple of feet into the air and dropped my flashlight on the damp grass. A chorus of laughter came from my friends who decided to use the situation to scare the crap out of me. I cursed at them as I tried to calm my startled nerves and rapid heart rate. I stood back up and reached down for my flashlight, deciding to use it to crack some skulls when I turned it back on. At first, I didn't comprehend what I saw, but then my dazed mind started to process it. On the statue's torso, I saw long streaks of red slowly pouring down. I raised the light upwards to see the red liquid coming out of its eyes. It looked as if it were crying blood. Either my friends were playing another trick on me, or I was really tripping out right then and there. Both might have been possible. if it weren't for the fact that my friends looked as weirded out as I was. I reached upwards to touch the red tears. It felt real enough. As I rubbed my fingers, I realized it was very thick and sticky. The smell of it made me realize it really was blood coming out of its eyes. There was no faking or hallucinating that thick metallic odor. I looked back up to its face and dropped the flashlight again. The statue was no longer looking over the cemetery, but instead looked right down at me with those bloody, tear-filled eyes. It also became much more lifelike. The stone, which at first was a dark, dirty gray, became a very, very pale white skin. She practically illuminated the graveyard. Her hair, once still and frozen, flowed freely and became pitch black in contrast to her pale complexion. She looked no longer like an angel statue, but more like a reanimated angel's corpse, if the description makes sense. Her wings, which were made of stone and tucked behind her, had opened fully and lively, as black as the moonless night. She jumped off the platform and took flight out of our view, disappearing into the void above. The only signs of her presence from a moment ago were droplets and streaks of blood and a few stray feathers from her wings. I picked one up to examine it. It looked like a raven or crow's feather until I touched it. It felt quite different from a bird's feather. It wasn't soft, but rather a grainy texture and wet with droplets. I walked back home in a daze from a combination of the still lingering buzz and the shock of what I just witnessed. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I got out of bed in the morning feeling groggy when my parents were waiting for me in the kitchen. They had told me that my grandfather had died the previous night. My grandfather and I were awfully close. I spent so much time with him when I was younger that he was very much like my other dad. He taught me about life and his experiences. We did everything together when we got a chance. Sometimes I could even tell him things I felt like I couldn't tell my parents. I was proud to call him my grandfather. His only flaw was that he was a heavy smoker. By heavy smoker, I mean heavy. I could guess he went through 2-3 packs a day. Whenever I visited him, he and the whole house just reeked of the noxious chemical odor of tobacco and a tiny mountain of ashes in his tray. Cigarette butts were littered all over his house, and there were burn marks all over his rugs and furnitures from when he dropped any lit ones. By the time the doctors found the cancer, it had spread from his lungs. The chances of successful treatment were minimal. The only thing we could do was make his last days as comfortable as possible. He was placed on hospice the next day. All he did was just wait for the end. He died at midnight, my parents said. Right on the dot. We buried him in the cemetery within the next couple days. While his casket was being lowered into the ground, I looked to the weeping angel, which had stood where it always does. I'm a little bit older now, in a different town as I'm writing this. It's autumn nights like this, during the new moon, when I think about that night. Was it all just a drug trip? Was it all fake? I normally would think so, but I have the feather of the weeping angel framed in my living room to prove me wrong.